All right. Hello, everyone. Thank you all for joining as folks roll in here. We are really excited to have you all join our webinar today to discuss something that's really critical and important and timely for associations, and that is how you can confidently manage a portfolio analysis. This can feel like a pretty overwhelming process for many, but it's really critical. And this is at a time when associations are being asked to do more with less. Many of our clients are working on thinner and thinner margins, and looking to create greater impact and focus. We're also engaging in a lot of planning in times of great uncertainty, and a portfolio analysis is an excellent tool to drive some meaningful change in your own organization. I'm really excited for our discussion today. I'm a practice director at McKinley Advisors. My name's Caroline. I've been working with the firm for 13 years, and I work primarily in what we call our business transformation space, which deals a lot with the operational side of running an association. And there is a lot of work being done right now to modernize association operating models, and do things differently than we have. I'm also really excited to be joined by my colleague Jesus, who is one of our esteemed analysts at McKinley. He comes to us from the for-profit world. Jesus, you want to quickly introduce yourself, and then we'll get started.
Thank you. Hi, everybody. My name is Jesus Aviña. I am an analyst with the business transformation team at McKinley Advisors. My expertise is in data and data strategy. So, in addition to the technical spreadsheet work and running the numbers, I love thinking about data. How are we looking at it? How do we derive insights? What do we do with those insights? So, I'm very excited to be here with you all and to share a little bit about how we approach these big portfolio analysis questions. Pass
Thank you,
back to you,
Jesus.
Caroline.
He's excellent at gathering data and then applying meaning on top of it. Okay, so slides will advance here. What we're gonna do in the next hour, the chat is open, Q&A is open. Feel free to utilize that. We want to make it engaging. We'll also have some time at the end for some questions and answers as well. But what we're gonna talk about today first is just the why behind a portfolio analysis, and why right now it's really critical to measure the ROI of your programs and your operational portfolio. Um, we are at the exercise itself is a little bit different than if you were working in a for-profit organization where everything the organization does is meant to drive revenue and sales, right? In associations, revenue is really funding everything else that we're doing. The mission makes the portfolio analysis process a little bit more nuanced than if you were just looking at profit margins. So we'll talk a little bit about what we mean by ROI and why this is not just an exercise in gathering data and information, but you also need some really strong strategic and leadership capabilities in order to actually make decisions based off of the information that you do gather. So we'll spend some time there. We'll also spend some time talking about some common roadblocks that associations often experience when conducting a portfolio analysis. And the reason we think that these are important to name is because they can get in the way of yielding positive outcomes and meaningful change in doing this exercise. So we'll talk about these pitfalls, what they are, some clarity around how you can manage those in your own organization. Think about what might pop up. You want to make sure you're ahead of those things. And they're okay when they show up. You can be comfortable that they're showing up. It means you're doing the process right. But there are some lessons to be learned there. And then finally, we'll leave you with some common KPIs and frameworks that we use when we look at an association operating model, and conduct a portfolio analysis. So hopefully you can take some metrics and some frameworks back to your own organization and start to think about how you might tackle this process. Okay, before we get started, I would love to hear from the folks here. Just enter into the Zoom chat. How many programs does your association currently operate or run? Ballpark figure. You can put just kind of a number in the chat. Doesn't have to be exact. 40, 20s, dozens, 7. Hi, Frank. 50 plus. This is all great, and I think this speaks to the reason why this is such a critical exercise. We're all over the map with the number of programs, and I didn't define program. You could count every P-pick and webinar you offer, or you could count your education portfolio. But the gist is that we've done some of this work with groups that run 90 programs, which is way more than Apple runs. Right. So a lot of times these legacy programs have a way of sticking around and creating a drain on the system. And so again, it makes this exercise really important to create some space for, to make sure that we are focused and we're intentional about how we're allocating our resources. Okay. So just a few statistics on why portfolio analysis is so critical. These are some indicators that we have gathered from association executives. Many of you are probably not surprised to see some of this, but there's really a sector-wide prerogative to prioritize not only our mission impact, but revenue health. And quite frankly, business across the association landscape in a way that is meaningfully different than it was 50 years ago. So we're operating and we're seeing a lot of financial uncertainty, and that's putting our missions at risk. We're seeing, some growth in associations leveraging investment incomes and maybe even reserves to backfill operating budgets that are, maybe in the red or not targeting a nice kind of 2 to 3% margin. So a portfolio analysis can really help reverse some of these indicators and create some confidence in where you are allocating your resources and the impact that they have. And then, of course, there's a lot of market disruption out there that's putting value propositions at the fore of the mind of many people who operate programs within an association. So all of that's to say it can be really uncomfortable and foreign in our nonprofit ethos to put, revenue health and impact front and center. But it does require some future thinking, and it's really important. And ultimately, the goal is to go from feeling really busy managing our portfolio of 50 programs to better, focused. Ideally, if you're engaging in this work and you've done it correctly, it's designed to keep your offerings relevant and high impact. It's also helpful in surfacing redundancies in your portfolio. A lot of times we end up with groups that say, "Hey, we've got some similar things going on here and some opportunities to be more efficient." It sources legacy programs that may have been built for our original member base that are no longer relevant or need to be significantly reimagined in order to be relevant. Um, it's a great exercise to do if you're just coming off the heels of strategic planning and you've set the North Star for the next 3 years of your organization and you've got strategic outcomes you're working towards. Great time to do a portfolio analysis to see if your programs are aligned to your strategy. It can also address resource strain that might be hidden or kind of unseen. And then finally, it strengthens overall financial health and sustainability. So these are why you would do a portfolio analysis. I know this isn't a surprise to anyone, but again, really important, particularly particularly right now. So, another quick poll for you all. What is driving you to be here today? If you had to choose among the reasons to do a portfolio analysis, what's most important for you? We'll give folks a second to put in their answers. All right. Jesus, are you seeing the results?
Yes. So
Great.
we see 38%, which is the largest segment, keep offerings relevant and high impact. Runner up, 29%, we have sure alignment with strategic priorities. And a more distant third, we have at 19% address inefficiencies and resource strain.
Great. I know we made you just do one answer. Diversification. Oh, PAR. Hello. Our friends at PAR are here. Um, diversify revenue streams also being really important to a portfolio analysis. This can also surface gaps that you might have and opportunities to generate additional funding and maximize your programs. Okay. A couple of notes on what a portfolio analysis requires. One big thing that we often see is it's not just an exercise in data, right? It's not we collect this information, we get some performance dashboards, and it tells us what to do. If you're serious about doing a portfolio analysis, it's going to require you to take some additional steps. The performance dashboards are very much an indicator of how your programs and offerings have historically performed, right? So you get some really good data and metrics. Then you have to engage in some strategic interpretation to figure out what this data is telling us. You need to contextualize that information. If you don't have clear outcomes for your programs, again, maybe it was made 75 years ago and over time the metrics have gotten lost. It's going to be really difficult to know what good looks like. So that's going to be your first step. And it's very much an exercise in strategy as well. It's also, there are things that are not going to be showing up in the data, emerging trends that are going to be happening, things that are coming down the pike that aren't going to show up in our quantitative data, but qualitatively, we know this is important for our association. So you want to make space for those conversations throughout this process. So it's not just a data process. And then ultimately, you should be able to take what you have to make some meaningful decisions about where you want to sustain your level of resourcing, what needs to be significantly reimagined, or where you want to invest more, what you just need to revise, where you might want to de-emphasize something that's important to offer, but we don't want to flow as many resources to it, or potentially what you're going to sunset. And sunsetting things can take several years. So ultimately, at the end of the process, you want to be able to engage in decision making. A lot of times we see it's very difficult for associations to postpone or sunset programs. And I think that's a culture thing, and legacy programs carry a lot of emotion with them. So you want to get ready for that as well. Okay, some common pitfalls. These are not necessarily inherently bad. It's just a reality of many of the environments that we work in. So some common pitfalls that we see when we try to do this work. One is trying to do everything at once. We've just done our strategic plan. We really want to look at all the things that we do against all the different criteria and make some decisions right away. Sometimes it makes more sense to start where the stakes are highest. A lot of times we see financial concentration within associations, and that can usually point to a few programs that matter the most. So you might want to focus in some of those high stake areas. Where are you getting money from? Where are you spending money? And allow that to influence how you're going to approach your analysis of your operational programs. Number two, two words that can stifle decision making, prove it. If you go too far down getting the perfect data, there is a point of diminishing returns there. that are going to yield in, uh, you know, non-decision making, essentially. So eventually you want to be able to use the best data available. It's not going to be perfect. It's never going to be perfect. And that's where you need to get a little bit comfortable with doing some strategic risk taking, and kind of making sense of what you do have available. You don't want to not engage in it because we don't have the exact data. Get what you have and use it and move on. A third pitfall is one I just spoke to, not knowing what success looks like. We haven't taken the time to define the why behind our programs. Um, you want to define program intent up front. Some offerings are built to generate margin. That's what they're there to do. Others are just there to advance mission. You need clarity on the role of each program and how that plays out in your portfolio. Without that, you're going to get a lot of data back and you're not going to know what to do with it, right? Jesus is nodding because we've been there. So we spend a little bit of time up front defining that, treating it like a one-time project. Associations are great at planning and doing things kind of at a one time and then we're kind of done with it. This is about creating a repeatable rhythm in your organization and building a muscle that you can continue and you can scale and expand to other areas of your organization once you get kind of conversant and used to it. And then the fifth is probably the most important one, ignoring cultural or political dynamics that might be in play. Um, Programs are often equated with people, right? They carry a lot of emotion. This worked really well for me. Why is it no longer working? So you want to name those dynamics and you want to make sure you're engaging the right stakeholders. There are people to be informed, there are people to be consulted, and ultimately decision making. That group needs to be empowered to be able to make decisions because if you have a too large of a group trying to make decisions, it's not going to yield a lot of progress. So those are some common pitfalls and some steps on how to work through them and spot them when they come up. Okay, another poll. What pitfall resonates most with you or your own organization? Takes a minute to get these polls in and back out to everybody.
Okay, it looks like we got results. This one does have 50% in one of these categories, which is trying to do everything at once. We got 50% response there. More distant second at 32%, we got not knowing what success looks like. Everybody else, or every other of these bullets was at a single digit percentage.
Yeah. The good news is those two pitfalls are manageable, right? You can take some baby steps, and there are some processes to kind of get upfront about what success does look like. So that's helpful. Okay, I am going to turn it over to Jesus, who is going to talk through some of the key areas that we think indicate readiness to engage in a portfolio analysis.
Thank you, Caroline. So one of the big buzzwords used to a lot of strategy is data-driven decision making, right? What we at McKinley refer to as data-informed processes. This centers the importance of numbers. You're looking for the magic number for that chart, that trend line that's going to reveal the path forward. But we know there's so much outside of the numbers that drives a portfolio analysis, and that looks different for different teams. So everyone is at a different state of readiness. In this section, I'm going to talk about the structured approach that we have to thinking about the elements beyond the numbers that directly affect the quality of a data review. The three pillars of readiness are data integrity, culture and process, and strategic focus. These domains are not hierarchical, but actually are interconnected and related to one another. Your organizational readiness will determine the relevant approach to the portfolio analysis. Together, the three domains represent the trust that is important to have in the raw data, in the people making the decisions, and in the decision-making process itself. Let's start with data integrity. By this, we mean how reliable and relevant is your data? Chances are that you are in the plurality of organizations that do not have a well-defined data strategy. So you'll find that, for example, the data that your teams collect does not match apples to apples with the kind of data you need to answer the big question that one asks in a portfolio analysis. There's a lot that goes into this. If you want to nerd out about data structure and strategy, I'm all for it after the webinar. But I do want to highlight some common pitfalls. One is inconsistent data. Sometimes metrics are tracked differently between programs or departments, making it difficult to do, for example, a cost to serve analysis. Sometimes the financial KPIs used for your conferences aren't appropriate for your certifications program or your thought leadership products. Another example that shows up regularly is the issue of tracking relevant metrics. Beyond the financials, I'm talking about things like member segmentation. Many dues and program revenue models are built around metrics that aren't always tracked in the transaction files. So for example, let's say you charge one price for earlier career and one price for premium event access. You might be surprised at how many teams don't track who's purchasing what and at what price point. This makes it difficult to do a segmentation analysis or evaluate margin to mission impact. The readiness of the raw data directly affects the decision-making process by either creating or removing trust from that process. So if you're trying to understand, for example, the value of a program, you need to be in agreement of what data you can use to make that determination. It needs to be reliable and relevant. Moving on to culture and progress. Culture and process. Your team's internal dynamics are critical players in a portfolio analysis. It's not just about the data itself, but how are we looking at it and with whom? There are readiness levels around relevant stakeholders. So who do you bring in and at what altitude? Who can speak to the reliability of the data? Who can speak to the strategic vision of the future? These are all different perspectives that you want in the room. The stakeholders will look different depending on your readiness to tackle the big questions. Sometimes it's best to keep it at a high level. Other times it is necessary to take a more granular approach. Culture readiness means having a willingness to involve staff and volunteers in conversations about impact, even when the perspectives differ. What you want is a shared understanding of how programs connect to mission, member value, and strategic priorities. The stronger the commitment to collaboration, the more comfort the team will have making decisions with imperfect data. And let's be honest, we all have imperfect data. So how do you make good decisions? We talked about the need for reliable and relevant raw data. We also talked about the need to have a solid collaborative culture in place. Completing the trifecta is strategic focus, which is the key measurement of readiness. You can have the best data in the world and a great team, but if you don't have a well-defined process for how to make those decisions, it can all fall apart. Where this tends to show up is when looking at non-financial metrics. Are the KPIs your organization is using built in such a way to allow for that apples to apples comparison between programs that are revenue drivers and programs that are mission drivers? Essentially, how do you measure impact? Net revenue is usually pretty straightforward, but quantifying contribution to mission is a lot more nuanced. So do you have a well-defined criteria to determine whether a program is doing well? Is there a shared understanding for what misalignment means? This is a world of questions that define the strategic focus. And at the heart of the answer to these questions is trust. Trust is critical. It shows up in all of these foundational concepts for readiness. You might have noticed that trust is in every one of these domain slides. The three domains are important to name and to score against because approaching big questions in a methodical and intentional way leads to trust. And our structured approach to a portfolio analysis allows a team to make good decisions regardless of their readiness levels. So now I am curious, and here is another poll question. I'm curious to hear from you about where you feel you're strong and what domain you feel needs the most attention. We should have hold music during this section while we wait for polls. Ah, results are in.
All right. So folks feel most strong, or it's a little bit split. Culture and process and strategic focus, kind of split evenly. But the vast majority of us feel weakest in data integrity. Um, that is what I was talking about earlier. Good enough is good enough. Otherwise, we're going to get stuck in trying to get the perfect data where it doesn't exist. You can build processes to get that data, but it makes the culture and process and the strategic process even more important because we're going to be operating in context of imperfect information. So that's helpful to know about yourselves up front, and where you might be able to get proxy information or where you really need to focus on getting data versus what we're comfortable kind of making decisions on in an absence of perfect data. Okay. So before we get into Q&A, a couple of indicators and frameworks to leave you with to think about how you can get started in your own organization. So first is Jesus just went through some of the key domains that we look at in our readiness assessment, which we're going to link at the end of this webinar. It's totally free. It provides you with some resources on where you might want to start. Many of you said trying to do everything at once. You don't need to do that. Depending on where you are in some of those domain areas, you can approach this in a number of ways. One is kind of a foundational, start with a facilitated discussion to align on the desired outcomes of doing a portfolio analysis in the first place. You might be looking to shore up expenditures in a certain area or be more efficient. You might be hot off the new strategic plan and making sure that your programs align there. Or you might be seeing some declining indicators that might speak to value and relevance, and that's what you want to look at. So understanding your desired outcomes can help drive how you approach your assessment. Also, naming your pitfalls and your blockers that you're probably going to be up against when you engage in it up front is great. So doing that as part of that, and then figuring out how we're going to address those, and then really agreeing on what programs we want to include and how we're going to measure success to give you a clear framework and roadmap for moving forward. So that's one kind of area you can start. Another is, again, not doing everything at once, starting with the programs that make the most sense to take a look at. These are areas where we've got some red flags. We've got a sense that maybe this isn't going right. We have a lot of resources flowing here. Start with one or two areas. Get used to applying that data and that framework, and kind of getting your team talking about what's working well and what's not. And then use those results to repeat it and expand it to other areas of your organization. If you are more advanced in all of those three domain areas, you're probably able to do a higher touch, wider assessment of your portfolio of offerings, and kind of applying that maintain, invest, divest, and sunset framework on top of it. This does require excellent data, and it does require a commitment to strategy and generative thinking as well. So those are kind of know your readiness, and that can help you set the pace at which you might want to start your portfolio analysis. Okay, so typically when we start this process, we kick it off with a financial review. Financials are critical. They're not everything. We have the mission, but these financial indicators can tell us where we might have programs that might warrant the most attention. And these are some key KPIs that we typically look at. Starting off with efficiency indicators. So one thing we look at is, salaries and overhead costs as a percentage of total program revenue can give you a sense of how well your program revenue absorbs some of your overhead. And there are benchmarks there that you want to be kind of in the ballpark in. If you're over those benchmarks, you maybe have some inefficiencies happening. Volatility. This is a longitudinal look at your budget versus your actuals. You can see overruns year over year in key program areas. If you are overrunning, that's telling you something. That gets to that second to last bullet where you might have expenses that are growing at a higher rate than the participation or the revenue growth indicators are growing. This can be an area that you might want to start with. Degree of revenue concentration. I have worked with clients where the goal is to really shore up resources because we want to reinvest them in our plan. And we end up looking at programs that are in the margin of what we do. So knowing where your expenditures are and starting there, if that's your goal, don't go looking at, these scalable programs that don't take a lot of time, talent, and treasure to run. We want to start where we're going to get the biggest impact. Staff time. A quick note there. No, nobody. It's very rare to have staff time allocated to the programs that you would like to assess very neatly and cleaned. It takes a lot of time to do that. So what we would recommend is at a minimum looking at direct staff salaries that can be tied to programs when you're looking at the cost of a program, and then just doing your best to allocate some of those indirect costs. Again, I mentioned that diminishing point of return on getting perfect data. That's an area that we see people spin their wheels on. But you do kind of want to take those direct and indirect costs into consideration as well. So we start here, and then that leads us into where we might want to focus our effort. And that's not the full picture. Of course, we have mission indicators. Jesus was talking about how nuanced those can be to actually measure. Many of you named that at the top of this call. Not every program needs a margin. Totally cool. But every program does need a clear role, and we need to know how it's doing against that intended role. So some common KPIs might relate to mission impact, might relate to value for your members or a segment or a customer, or the strategic opportunity. You can also do risk assessments in different program areas. What I will say is there are a number of different KPIs that you can be looking at. I would strongly recommend that you stick to like three, maybe four. If you go beyond that, you're going to be just swamped with data and it starts to contradict itself. So knowing the most important things to look at is part of that first step in developing a framework based on your needs and your programs. There are a lot of different ways to visualize this data and bring it to life. This is an example. We customize our performance dashboards for our clients, so no one looks the same. This is a very common one. It is, some of the bigger four consulting firms that work with for-profit companies often look at net contribution against market growth. We look at mission impact. And it creates kind of four different quadrant areas that can help you arrive at key decision points. Mission impact, financial contribution. It's pretty simple when you overlay those data metrics on top of one another. So the opportunity zone is where you have high mission or high value and maybe lower margin. These are mission-driven programs. A lot of times these might be benefits of memberships that is subsidized through dues, or they're not big money makers, but they are critical to protect and maintain. So making sure that you're continuing on those high value. Then you have your value zone areas, which are kind of your high value and high margin. A lot of times annual meetings show up here. Um, you want to protect these at all costs, and you want to make sure you're looking ahead 3, 5 years out to make sure that the value remains high, so that you're kind of looking ahead there. Attention zone are those low value but high margin. This could be sponsorships, right? Like they're not, although, uh, there's a case to be made for sponsorships and their tie into your mission as well. But things that aren't bringing a lot of value, are there opportunities to bring those things closer to your mission? And then finally, the watch list. These are those low value, low margin things. And a lot of times we get into conversations with people who say, "Oh, well, I know, but it's really important for us to offer this." Okay, if you're going to do it, go big or go home. You want to be offering things that aren't just kind of spinning around and adding noise to the system. So that's where we see people get really hesitant to make decisions and maybe stop something or temporarily postpone something. That's okay too. Just pause it for a little bit. But this is a common way we look at some of the results. I'm going to leave you before we open it up for Q&A, some helpful guiding principles, um, ways of showing up when you're doing a portfolio analysis with your teams and your leaders. Um, First, make sure you're focusing at the right altitude. I think someone in the chat said, "What do you count as a program?" You do not need to look at everything as a line item. Bring it up a level. Um, that'll help you be able to manage the process a little bit easier. Also, know who to engage as part of this process. You want some thought around that, and you want to be intentional around who you're engaging in your portfolio analysis and at what points in the process. Again, become conversant in the why behind programs so you understand the numbers that you're reading when you get them back. Commit to leveraging the available data. You will get to a point where you wish you had better data, and you're not going to get it right now. So, what can you do now? What can you maybe postpone later once you get more data? Ultimately, you should be able to take some meaningful data to inform some strategic conversation and decision making. Assuming positive intent is really important as well. People can start to feel really defensive, and it can get political. It's not a judgment. This is for the betterment of the organization. It's for our mission. It's for our members. No data is perfect. It's not going to tell you exactly what to do. That's where the people come into the equation. There's a human side to this that shouldn't be underestimated. Programs are not people, right? So let's name that up front. And then finally, committing to not losing sight of the forest for the trees. As you get into it and into some of your performance dashboards, it can be really easy to go down rabbit holes, especially if you're in STEM or you work with engineers. But we're here for a purpose, and you don't want to lose sight of that. So those are some guiding principles that we often use. This is a QR code to our portfolio readiness assessment. It's 5 or 10 minutes. It walks you through some key questions around those domains that Jesus went through and can give you a sense of where you might want to start um, in your own process. So feel free to take a picture of that and we can follow up with some helpful resources. Okay, I'm going to open it up for questions. So use that Q&A box. Who should be involved from your team in a portfolio analysis? That is a really great question. So a lot of times we will engage a task force of volunteer leaders that are diverse in their perspectives. This can help ensure buy-in. Um, Use them as a sounding board. You do want some future thinkers engaged in the process. You also want to engage department leads. They know a lot about programs. And ultimately, though, you want to have kind of a smaller group of decision makers at the end, maybe in the C-suite or your executive leadership teams. Having kind of a buy-in process and then ultimately kind of a decision maker group is very helpful. Thank you all.
Thank you.